Once upon a time, the beautiful princess lived in her father's royal palace, surrounded by wealth and luxury. She paid no attention to the suitors who came to ask for her hand, mocking them and considering them beneath her. Her arrogance was evident in all her actions. As she rejected every suitor without even listening to what they had to offer, her heart was filled with pride, and she saw no one worthy of standing by her side. She lived in her own world, far removed from the realities of others, unaware of the lessons life had in store for her. The king began to feel increasingly concerned about his daughter's behavior. One by one, the princess was losing suitors because of her arrogance. Seemingly unaware of the seriousness of her situation, the king summoned his advisors to discuss the matter and started contemplating possible solutions. He knew that his daughter's pride could impact the happiness of the kingdom, so he resolved to teach her a harsh lesson. However, none of his advisors could come up with an effective way to change her behavior. The suitors began to leave the palace one after another, feeling humiliated. They had traveled from distant lands, filled with hope of winning the princess's hand, only to be met with her arrogant behavior. Each one felt disheartened and retreated in silence. The princess, however, paid no attention to their feelings and continued to hold her head high with disdain. With each departure, her pride only grew, convinced that no one was worthy of her. In a moment of anger and sorrow, the king decided to punish his daughter for her arrogance. He realized that spoiling her was no longer effective and that she needed to learn humility. He devised a plan to teach her a powerful life lesson. Standing before everyone, he announced that he would marry her off to the first poor man who asked for her hand, regardless of his wealth or status. This decision sent shockwaves through the crowd, but the king was determined to teach his daughter the true value of humility. The next day, a poor man arrived at the palace, filled with shyness and anxiety. Despite his modest clothing, he was brave enough to ask for the princess's hand. Everyone was astonished at how the man remained unaffected by his financial state. Amidst the luxury surrounding the princess, the king immediately agreed to his request. While the princess was in complete shock, she couldn't believe what was happening, her heart filled with confusion. The princess was deeply shocked when her father announced his decision in front of everyone. She couldn't believe that she would marry a poor man, feeling that her dignity was being compromised. She thought of ways to escape the situation, but found no way out. Fear and confusion filled her heart, and she had no idea how to handle this embarrassing scenario. She couldn't even begin to imagine how she would deal with the poor man who had suddenly become her destined husband. The wedding ceremony was extremely simple, far from the grandeur the princess was accustomed to. She wore a modest dress, standing beside the poor man who had nothing to his name but a kind heart. As everyone watched, the princess felt deeply ashamed, unable to do anything but go through with the experience. Her heart was breaking inside, while the man smiled shyly, unaware of her inner turmoil. The ceremony ended, and the princess moved into the poor man's humble home, carrying a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The princess lived in a poor and humble home, far from the comforts she once enjoyed in the palace. She struggled to adapt to the harsh conditions of her new life. The room was very small, crowded with the essentials of a modest family. Everything was a stark contrast to what she was used to, and the situation weighed heavily on her emotionally. She missed the palaces and luxury, and for the first time, she began to feel real pain. The princess began to struggle with adapting to the daily household chores. She had to clean, cook, and wash clothes, all tasks that were completely foreign to her royal life. At first, she felt frustrated and unable to complete anything properly. Her body was exhausted, and her mind was overwhelmed. She realized that life had become incredibly challenging, and that she had underestimated the value of the simple efforts she once looked down upon. The poor husband humbly helped the princess without a trace of pride. He did everything he could to make life easier for her. While she was consumed by negative thoughts, he always remained cheerful and supportive. Through him, she learned a different kind of strength, the strength drawn from simplicity and humility. He treated everyone with kindness, and little by little, the princess began to see him as someone truly worthy of admiration. With the passing of days, the princess began to notice a change in her heart. She realized that her husband was not only poor in wealth, but rich in generosity, humility, and kindness. She started to observe how he treated others with kindness and how he lived happily despite the hardships of life. She learned that money does not make a person great, but rather morals and values. Her heart became filled with admiration for him, and her thoughts about life began to change. The princess decided to change and begin helping her husband with the household chores. She now felt that these tasks were part of life and reflected her true character. She smiled as she cleaned and cooked alongside her husband with a genuine smile. Every day she learned how to be humble, and that a person's true worth lies in their actions and morals. She started accompanying her husband in everything he did, and without realizing it, she had become a completely different person. The young princess returned to her father's palace after learning valuable life lessons. She stood humbly next to her husband, filled with a sense of peace and maturity she had never known before. The king looked at her with tenderness and pride, greeting her with the eyes of a father who sees a real change in his daughter. The princess wore simple yet elegant clothes, reflecting her transformed character. The courtiers observed her with admiration and respect, realizing that the once arrogant princess had now become a symbol of humility and generosity. The princess became a symbol of humility and generosity in the kingdom, as she began to actively help the poor and needy, working to spread noble values among the people. She stood among the villagers and children, distributing food and resources with a smile full of love and compassion. Everyone looked at her with admiration and respect, witnessing how she had transformed from an arrogant princess into a beloved and kind-hearted figure. Her husband stood beside her, proud of supporting her in every step she took toward goodness, and the kingdom flourished thanks to her efforts in spreading kindness and humility.